Today, we're going to dive into this really incredible story from ancient history. And what's amazing is, it's a story with no big-shot generals or clashing armies, but it is powerful. This is the story of the women of Amphissa and how a battle was won without a single sword ever being lifted.
So how is that even possible, right? We're about to explore a moment where the whole course of a violent night was changed, not by force, but by a quiet, kind of profound act of just humanity.
All right, to really get this story, we first need to understand the world it's happening in. And let me tell you, it was not exactly a peaceful time.
I love this slide because of the contrast. You know, we think of ancient Greece as this cradle of civilization, philosophy, democracy, art, and it was. But the reality on the ground, especially in the 4th century BCE, it was an era of constant, brutal conflict. The Greek world was a patchwork of small city-states, and each one had its own pride, its own gods, and its own grudges. It was a time of just relentless power plays and revenge.
And our story is set right in the middle of this very tense world, in a little city called Amphissa, a place that was about to become the stage for something truly extraordinary.
Now, to understand what went down in Amphissa, we've got to meet the group of women who are at the very heart of all this.
They were called the Thiliads. Now, these were devout followers of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, festivals, and this kind of divine, ecstatic madness. They were a huge part of the religious life back then.
So their worship wasn't, quiet or contained in a building. It was a pilgrimage. For their sacred annual rituals, they'd travel from city to city, and they often worshipped way out on remote mountainsides. And here's the key thing. They would enter this trance-like state, singing and dancing for their god, completely lost in their devotion.
But it's this very ritual, this incredible journey of faith that leads to a really dangerous turn. Their devotion ends up putting them in a spot where they're extremely vulnerable. So just picture this. A group of Thyiades has just left the famous city of Delphi. The journey's long, the ritual itself is physically and emotionally exhausting. Completely worn out, they wander right into the territory of Amphissa. Now, they have no idea, but Amphissa is an enemy city. They're just looking for shelter, so they find a temple, collapse onto the floor, and fall into this deep, deep sleep. And this is the exact moment the story could have become a total tragedy, but instead, it became a legend.
In the dark of the night, they're not alone for long. Their presence doesn't go unnoticed. The sleeping women are found.
And they aren't found by just anyone. They are discovered by the men of their enemy city, Amphissa.
In that time, discovering helpless women from an enemy city, well, it really only meant one thing. The men saw an opportunity for revenge, for violence. History is just filled with horrible outcomes from moments exactly like this one. Everything was about to go so wrong. But right then, just as violence seems like it's about to erupt, something changes. Other people emerge from the shadows, the local women of Amphissa, who have seen exactly what is about to happen. And they make a decision in an instant. There's no panic, no shouting, no pleading with the men. They just act. And they're guided by this simple, unbelievably powerful sense of shared humanity.
And what they did was just brilliant. First, they quietly and gently covered the sleeping Thyiades with their own clothes and shawls. Then, they formed a silent, unbroken circle around them. And finally, they just stood there, a silent human shield facing the armed men of their own city. They were standing with nothing but their dignity against drawn swords.
So what happens when this silent act of courage meets a mob that's bent on violence? Let's take a look at the aftermath.
I mean, this scene was something else. No screams, no fear, just this calm, unshakable strength. And when they were confronted by that, the men's anger, it just started to curdle into shame. They saw not enemies, but women protecting other women, and one by one, they lowered their swords.
You can just imagine, the next morning, when the Thyiades woke up, they learned what could have happened and what actually did. They were stunned. The women of Amphissa, women from an enemy city, had saved their lives. They were treated with total respect and then escorted safely all the way back to their own territory.
And this story of quiet bravery, it didn't just fade away. Nope, it was so powerful that it's been remembered for over 2,000 years.
The famous ancient historian Plutarch actually recorded this event, and he saw it as way more than just a local story. For him, it was proof of this profound lesson. that a real civilization is defined not just by its laws, but by its capacity for mercy. Centuries later, the story inspired this famous painting. And what's so cool is how the artist chose to tell the story. He didn't paint the scary confrontation with the men. There are no swords, no chaos, no violence. Instead, he focuses entirely on the morning after, the calm, the dignity, and that powerful image of women caring for other women. He chose to paint the humanity, not the conflict.
So what's the big takeaway here? While this story teaches us that real strength isn't always loud, sometimes it's found in quiet character. It shows us that women in history aren't just victims of war, they can be powerful guardians too. And maybe most importantly, it reminds us that sometimes a simple act of humanity can be more powerful than an entire army.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In a world that's so often filled with shouting and aggression, it's really worth asking ourselves, when is silence the most powerful weapon of all?